I'm going to start behind the podium here, but then I'm going to move around. I'm a descendant of an Italian family, so I like to use my hands when I talk. The book, before I talk about what I'm going to talk about, it's related to this book. I wrote this book in 2012. It was released. And this is, like you, this is a grassroots effort. I totally funded this myself. I took about 3 years off of work to get this completed. I did the research, writing, and production, and I've been traveling around on my own expense for 2 years around the country. I've spoken on Capitol Hill. There's 150 copies of this book now in Congress. I've met with my congressmen, my senators. I've met with other legislators. I've been on TV, one program right now. I've got somebody now helping me get more. And I've also spoken at American University in Washington, D.C. several times, and I'm scheduled to speak at Ohio State University in September. I'm going to speak to both the undergraduate business class and the graduate business class. So what's this one little guy doing from, right now I live in the Twin Cities, but I spent most of my adult life here in Texas. I spent 9 years in the U.S. Navy as a cryptologist. When I left the Navy, I was recruited by Texas Instruments, and I worked here. And I absolutely love Texas and consider Texas my home. And I'm in the process of moving back. So, and I'm not saying that because I'm here today, but that's how my wife and I both feel. We moved north 10 years ago because my mother-in-law was very ill. She had cancer, and she needed us to take care of her. So we went up there and did that, and now we're coming back. So, and I'll tell you, what I love about Texas is Texas has the can-do attitude. So Texans don't sit around and wait for something to happen. They go make it happen. And that's what we need to do now. And actually, a good friend of mine who's like 4 or 5 generations back or maybe longer, he said, you know where that comes from? That's because when the Comanches were attacking, we didn't have time to sit around and wait for the army to show up. We had to figure out how to survive. So by the time the army got here, there'd still be people alive. So anyway, so that was his take. But let me kind of go into a little bit of what I'm going to say. I did write some things down. I'm going to go off and on paper here, and but I want to tell you that my book and me are nonpartisan. They truly are, and the reason, and don't get discouraged by that, because George Washington, who I absolutely love and adore, he's one of my heroes. He was nonpartisan, and in fact, he warned us against the dangers of partisanship. And so was John Adams. John Adams loosely affiliated with what was to eventually become the Republican Party. He was a Federalist, but loosely affiliated. Didn't like politics, didn't like the division. And I'm of the same ilk. I'm an American patriot. My family goes back to the beginnings of this country on both sides. Matter of fact, one of my distant relatives died here in the Alamo. He was from Rhode Island. His name's Albert Martin. So I'm going to tell you, America is not about red and blue. America is about red, white, and blue. America is about patriotism. America is about the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That's who defines who we are, not a political party. So my book and my talk today are truly nonpartisan. So and I ask, as we talk to each other, that we open our minds and open our hearts and listen to what I'm about to tell with you with American ears and American heart. And put aside any partisan thoughts, because I'm telling you, in my book, it exposes both the Republicans and the Democrats have caused this economic mess that we now find our country in. And that's not an opinion, that's a fact. So let me explain a little bit more. And I'll tell you why I say that and why it is a fact. And my book details it out. So why is the U.S. economy failing? Well, let me start with a quote by Theodore Roosevelt. And excuse me while I read from this paper, because I want to make sure I get it right. Theodore Roosevelt said over 100 years ago that the things that will destroy America are prosperity at any price, peace at any price, safety first instead of duty first, and the love of soft living and the get-rich-quick theory of life. Does that sound like our situation today or what? Wall Street's a casino. It's not about investing money so that we can build jobs, manufacturing, and have a production-based economy. And I'm going to talk about that more here in a second. That's the get-rich-quick theory in life. I don't have to work. I just throw some money out there and more comes back. As Roosevelt has warned, our country is being destroyed. Our liberty and our children's futures are literally being sold out by those who seek prosperity at any price, love soft living, and embrace a get-rich-quick theory of life. But, you know, today, as we're showing here, this can all change. You know, the beauty about America, and I talk about this in the final chapter of my book, is we keep constantly reinventing ourselves. That's because we have freedom, liberty. As long as we have those, we're able to have discussions like this, we're able to hash things out, we'll continue to reinvent ourselves. If we ever lose our liberty, then that won't be possible. And that's why the folks in China, who I've been there many, many times doing business, they don't have liberty. They don't have freedom because, and they don't have the opportunity like we do to hash things out like we're doing now. So the single biggest threat to our nation's our nation's freedom, and what's caused this massive debt that we talk about today, is the trade deficit. And you know, that's something that's never talked about. And I've been going around the country trying to reach out, and I'm glad I'm here today because Americans don't really understand that up until 1975, the United States always ran a trade surplus. After 1975, we've run nothing but trade deficits. In fact, we have the world's largest trade deficits in the history of the world. No other nation has exported its wealth at this rate and survived. The only nation that came close was the Ottoman Empire, and we all know what happened to them. We're on the same course, folks. I'm telling you, in my book, I've got one chapter on India. Did you know that for 17 centuries, India was one of the world's wealthiest nations? And in the course of 80 years, because of British rule and the same type of free trade that we've now imposed upon ourselves, they went from the wealthiest to the poorest nation on the planet. So this trade deficit that we have, out of 196 countries, we're dead last. We have the world's largest trade deficit. In fact, it's 10 times larger than Turkey, who is the 195th nation. So we're putting our standard of living in our country, our economic situation, on a path that's worse than the Turkish economy. And I know that's hard for some of you to believe, but that's what's happening, folks. And the only reason we haven't felt the effects of it yet is because we're living on borrowed time and borrowed money. As soon as the money runs out and this government can no longer borrow a third of what it can and the social welfare program stop, this house of cards collapses. And we see what really exists in America, and it's not going to be a pretty sight. Unless we change course, that is absolutely going to happen. So, this thing we call free trade, and I talk about this in a whole chapter in my book, it's really at the root cause of all this. And I'm not against free markets, and I'm not against even free trade. But what we got going on here, folks, isn't trade at all, and it's not free trade. What Ronald Reagan talked about was free and fair trade. He said we're willing to be trade partners but not trade pansies. Okay? So there's an important distinction here. If everybody's playing by the same rules, there's free markets in our trading partners' societies, and they allow us the same access that we allow them to their markets, then it all should work, according to the theory. But that's not reality. That's not what's happening. And that hasn't happened for the past 50 years. And that's why, folks, we're in the position we're in. Because the folks in Wall Street, they just want to make a quick buck. So, and I've got some charts that I wish I could have showed you today that I show around the country. And by the way, when I give these presentations around the country, I have Democrats, Republicans, independents in the room. At the end of the meeting, I got American citizens that are all concerned and all agreeing on these points that I'm bringing up to you today. This cuts across the political spectrum. It really does. And the endorsements I have on my book are from people from all sides. So the reality is, if you look at the fact of it is, what we got going on here, folks, is not trade. What we've got going on here is the looting of the American economy. And so the model that these so-called trade agreements are set up with is produce it somewhere else, sell it here. Produce it at the lowest cost possible somewhere else, sell it here, tariff and tax-free. Now, if you try to do the same in reverse, good luck. I've been to China, I've been to South America, I've been all over the world. There's nowhere in the world you're going to be able to get goods into the country tariff and tax-free. That only happens in America. Matter of fact, if you try to ship stuff into China, you'll pay probably a minimum of a 45% tariff that they call value-added tax for any goods going into that country. So, our political leaders in Washington, they like to say that they talk about the race to the bottom. And what I say when I speak in my presentation is the race is over, folks, and we're winning. Because no other country is allowing their economy to be totally gutted out the way the United States has allowed its economy. So how do we fix this? We have to rebuild the production side of our economy. And really, for that to happen, we have to totally do away with these globalized trading agreements that we've locked ourselves into. See, these agreements, there's probably something that most of you are totally unaware of. And it's funny, the Republicans in the House and the Senate, they pretend a lot of times like they really dislike Obama. But let me tell you one thing that they all agree on, and that's this issue I'm talking to you about. There's an agreement that both the Republicans and Obama are pushing secretly very, very hard, and it's called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And if you don't know about it, please Google it, because I'm going to tell you what, that, more than anything we talked about here today, will destroy the U.S. Constitution and will destroy what we know as America. And this agreement's been being secretly negotiated for about 5 or 6 years now, and they're trying to push it through on what they call fast track, so that the media is not even covering this. Why? Because the media is owned by 6 large corporations. And they got people lobbying to get this thing passed, because part of it is to deny internet freedom and to deny a bunch of other things. And I'm telling you, folks, what's happening is there's a movement here that it's become all about money. And so and I show these graphics in my book, both the Republicans and Democratic parties, they're being funded by the same sources, mostly the financial industry. And huge amounts of money are getting dumped into both sides, equal basis, especially in Congress. And so they're pulling the strings. And they're not acting out of the interest of America, they're acting out of self-interest and its financial interest. And one point that I make in the book, and that I want to make to you now, is this is unregulated global capitalism. And I talk about this in detail in the book. We developed what's called American capitalism system, right after the Great Depression, because we had an unregulated system. Most people didn't realize the Great Depression was one of like 4 or 5 depressions that we had before that one. They were a regular occurrence. We had financial failings in this country, bank runs on a regular basis before the Great Depression. And so we put regulations in place after the Great Depression to solve that problem. It was called Glass-Steagall, amongst other things. We got rid of that. In this frenzy to deregulate, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. Okay? And this is a fact. So I'm not advocating government regulation, large or small. I'm advocating smart regulation. And we have to fix this financial mess that we've created and get the commercial banking and investment banking separated again, and then start rebuilding. Get Wall Street back under control of the people, and get them financing the U.S. economy and financing business in the United States. We've got to reestablish not only patriotism, like we're talking about here as far as Constitution and supporting liberty and freedom, but we've got to finance patriotism as far as economic patriotism, and rebuilding American industry and American factories and putting American people back to work. You're not going to solve the problem by having this debate on minimum wage. My argument is you don't want to pay somebody at Burger King the same job that you would pay them working in a factory. What you need to do is create more factories so you can get people out of Burger King and get them back to work. And then the Burger King and these other service jobs, that should be for people that are in college and high school that are just making some extra money. That shouldn't be for supporting a family. And again, this is why Obamacare, all these things we're talking about, what these are symptoms of the bigger problem. And the problem, folks, is we've destroyed our economy. And now we have to have a rational, sensible, intelligent discussion together as American citizens on how to reverse that. And what's interfering with us having that rational, intelligent discussion is the folks that are profiting from the destruction of the U.S. economy don't want us to talk about this. They want us to continue to fight with each other about all these other issues so that we remain distracted and divided. And we don't get to the real heart of the matter. Because if we get to the heart of the matter, they're not going to be making as much money. So this is what this book is about. And again, this is all self-funded, and it's won 4 awards. It's gotten great reviews. It's got, I think, 15 5-star reviews now on Amazon.com from people around the country. So I'd really appreciate it. I flew down here at my own expense to talk to you today from the Twin Cities. And I appreciate it if you could support me by taking a copy of the book and reading it. Most importantly, when you read it, talk to other people about it, because what I talk about here and what I talked about to you today, this doesn't change, folks, until we have a political revolution in this country and we clean up and open up this political process. The one last point I'll make, which I totally support the Tea Party and the other groups that are putting pressure on this system, is if competition is good for business and industry, then why isn't it good for politics? We used to have a competitive elections system in this country up until about 100 years ago, and I talk about this in the book, and then it started getting locked down through various mechanisms, and now it's totally closed and it's rigged. That needs to change. And so that's not going to change until you folks, until all of us as Americans stand up and be counted. And you know what I say is I stand with no man. I stand with the Constitution of the United States and the Declaration of Independence. God bless you and God bless Texas.